Alrighty, I think I've been gone long enough, so let's just dive right in. Trace half of a trapezoid onto the front of your dress form. This is going to be the front of your bodice. Don't forget to add a little V-neck into the middle of your bodice. So when you're draping over the bust, you will get a lot of extra fabric that gives you no choice but to either pleat them or add darts in order for the fabric to lie flat on top of your bust. I use this excess fabric to create two bottom pleats. Now cut and trace this mock-up onto a piece of paper, and you're going to slash and spread the top to create a ruffly effect. Don't forget to also mark your pleats onto the pattern paper. Cut out a mock-up of your top. By the way, I also ended up making a new bodice pattern. I basically just spread out the top a little bit less, so it wasn't as ruffly as you see here. I also scooped out the neckline. The pattern fit me just fine, I just thought that it was much more ruffly than I liked it. Except for the fold, add a ½ inch seam allowance all around the bodice. As you can see, my pattern looks different from the original one. Pin your mock-up bodice onto your dress form. This is my original mock-up. I didn't cut another one from the new pattern I made because I didn't have enough fabric for that. Pin some fabric underneath your bodice and start draping the front of the skirt. Ignore the upside down triangle that you see on that fabric. I'm actually repurposing this muslin from another project, so just ignore the upside down triangle. It's irrelevant. Now drape the back of the skirt. It looks like the front of the skirt, but the side is longer because you will be sewing the side of the bodice onto the back of the skirt. So this is just to give you an idea of what the back of the skirt will look like. As you can see, we will be sewing the side of the bodice to the side of the back of the skirt. So this is what both pattern pieces look like. And this is how I trace my pattern. So I added a ½ inch seam allowance on all around the pattern except on the fold. And notice how I curved the bottom of the skirt outwards, because when I traced it on my dress form, it sort of curved in, and that would made it more tight-fitting than I would have liked. I made sure that the curve curved out. I also straightened the back of the dress because I plan on cutting it on the fold. The bottom of the back of the dress was curved out as well. So this is what the two pattern pieces look like. As you can see, the hips look similar in shape. I don't really trust my draping skills, so when I cut out my fabric, I made sure I cut it a little bit bigger than my actual pattern piece. I cut it about 3 inches bigger than my actual pattern piece. Cut out two front bodice and make sure that you marked where the pleats are. Pin your pleats down onto both bodices. Sew down all of the pleats using a basting stitch. Cut out two strips of fabric that is 1½ inches wide. You are going to iron them into a bias tape. So, spoiler alert, you're going to be making a lot of bias tape in this video. Sew the bias tape onto half of the V-neck like so. To sew the other half of the V-neck, you're going to fold the bias tape like I am right now and fold it over again to sew the other side of a V-neck. You're going to basically start sewing where you stop sewing the first half of the V-neck. As you can see, I am marking where I stopped sewing from the other half of my V-neck, and from that dot, I will be sewing from that dot to the other half of the V-neck. Make sure that you're only sewing through 2 layers of fabric and you're not sewing the other half of the bias tape when you're sewing the second half of the V-neck. So you know how we made that fold in the middle of the v-neck in order to sew the second half of the v-neck? So you're going to unfold that fold kind of and draw a triangle, and you're going to sew the sides of the triangle and trim it. So I don't have a good angle of me drawing the triangle, but I do have a video that I am watching in order for me to sew the neckline. So please check out the video that I link in the description box to see how you're supposed to sew the neckline. But basically, the triangle is supposed to create a sort of pointed edge onto the middle of the bias tape so that when you flip it over, you would have a nice clean looking v-neck. I'm sorry that I'm not able to really explain how to finish the bias tape in this video, but trust me, the video that I link down in the description box is a lot better at explaining on how to finish this kind of neckline. Cut out another long piece of fabric that's going to be about 1.5 inches in width and about 1.5 to 2 yards in length. You're going to fold it like a bias tape again, and then you're going to sew down this bias tape. This is going to be your straps, so after you sew it down, you're going to cut it in half. Make sure you hem the ends of your bias tape so that the ends won't fray. You hem it by basically folding it over once before sewing the bias tape closed on the sides. Sew the top of the bodice together. After you cut your straps in half, place them underneath the top of your bodice, and before sewing the armholes together, make sure that you leave a gap so that you can put your straps through it. Understitch your lining so that your lining will stay in place when you wear it. Sew a little tube onto the top of the bodice so that the straps can stay in place. Be careful not to sew into the straps because they are supposed to be adjustable. So you're going to finish the seams with a French seam. So you're going to sew the top of the skirt to the bottom of the bodice wrong sides together and not right sides together. Then you're going to fold over your bodice again, and then this time you're going to sew over that seam right sides together. Make sure you are using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance for each seam. You can just serge the edges, but I felt too lazy to get my serger out, so I just French seamed it. So I kind of just cheated a little bit and just used a tank top as a reference as to where my back straps should be placed. I ended up placing each of the straps 3 inches from the center. Pin your straps right sides together to the back of your skirt where you marked and secure them with a straight stitch. You can try on your dress like it is to see if the straps were placed well. Cut another bias tape that is about the width of 1.5 inches again. This time it's going to be the same length as the top of your back of the skirt. And you're going to sew the bias tape right sides together to the back of the skirt. Fold over your bias tape once, covering all the raw edges, and then fold it over again, flipping the bias tape to the inside of the dress. So here's where things went a little bit wonky for me. So at first I sewed down the size I plan on making another French seam, so I sewed it down wrong size together. And then afterwards I flipped the fabric over so that I was sewing these seams again inside out right size together. Then I hemmed the bottom by folding it up twice, covering all the raw edges and securing it with a straight stitch. But as I tried on the dress, I noticed that it was a little bit loose around the bust area, and I realized that it was because that the back was a little bit, I made the back a little bit too wide, and so I had to basically take in more of the back. So I basically just undid all my French seam just so that I can adjust the size of the back. After adjusting the size of the back, I trimmed off all the excess fabric, leaving a half an inch seam allowance. However, the dress is now too tight to become a slip-on dress because the fabric wasn't stretchy enough, so I had to add a zipper in the side. So I couldn't French seam these sides, and I had to serge the edges instead. So I sew both sides like normal with a straight stitch, but on the left side, I sewed it with a basting stitch so that I can attach my zipper. To attach your zipper, basically just pin your zipper onto the seam allowance of your left side of the dress, and you're going to sew it with a zipper foot attachment. Once you're done sewing the zipper, you can basically remove the basting stitch so that you now have a functionable zipper. You only need to sew a basting stitch as long as your zipper, then afterwards you can finish the side with a regular straight stitch. And now you're finally done! So this is what the dress looks like. So this is the final result, guys. Thank you so much for sticking with me, and I hope I'll see you in the next one. Bye!